Good morning, 5A. Hope you're doing all right this Monday morning. I am going to carry on reading from Howl's Moving Castle. This is chapter 4, which is about halfway down page 17, if you want to click on the link in the box below. Chapter 4, in which Sophie discovers several strange things. When Sophie woke up, daylight was streaming across her. Since Sophie remembered no windows at all in the castle, her first notion was she'd fallen asleep trimming hats and dreamed of leaving home. The fire in front of her had sunk to rosy charcoal and white ash, which convinced her she'd certainly dreamed there was a fire demon. But her very first movements told her there was something she had not dreamed. There were sharp cracks from all over her body. "Ow!" she exclaimed. "I ache all over." The voice that exclaimed was a weak, cracked piping. She put her knobbly hands to her face and felt wrinkles. At that, she discovered she'd been in a state of shock all yesterday. She was very angry indeed with the Witch of the Waste for doing this to her, hugely, enormously angry. "Sailing into shops and turning people old," she exclaimed. "Oh, what I won't do to her." Her anger made her jump up in a salvo of cracks and creaks and hobble over to the unexpected window. It was above the workbench. To her utter astonishment, the view from it was a view of a dockside town. She could see a sloping, unpaved street lined with small, rather poor-looking houses and masts sticking up beyond the roofs. Beyond the masts, she caught a glimmer of the sea, which was something she'd never seen in her life before. "Wherever am I?" Sophie asked the skull standing on the bench. "I don't expect you to answer that, my friend," she added hastily, remembering this was a wizard's castle, as she turned to take a look around at the room. It was quite a small room, with heavy black beams in the ceiling. By daylight, it was amazingly dirty. The stones of the floor were stained and greasy, ash was piled within the fender, and cobwebs hung in dusty droops from the beams. There was a layer of dust on the skull. Sophie absently wiped it off as she went to peer into the sink beside the workbench. She shuddered at the pink and grey slime in it, and the white slime dripping from the pump above it. Howl obviously didn't care what squalor his servants lived in. The rest of the castle seemed to be beyond one or the other of the 4 low black doors around the room. Sophie opened the nearest in the end wall beyond the bench. There was a large bathroom beyond. In some ways, it was a bathroom you might normally find only in a palace, full of luxuries such as an indoor toilet, a shower stall, an immense bath with clawed feet and mirrors on every wall. But it was even dirtier than the other room. Sophie winced from the toilet, flinched at the colour of the bath, recoiled from the green weed growing in the shower, and quite easily avoided looking at her shrivelled shape in the mirrors, because the grass was plastered with blobs and runnels of nameless substances. The nameless substances themselves were crowded onto a very large shelf over the bath. There were jars, boxes, tubes, and hundreds of tattered brown packets and paper bags. The biggest jar had a name. It was called Drying Power, in crooked letters. Sophie wasn't sure whether there should be a D in that or not. She picked up a packet at random. It had Skin scrawled on it, and she put it back hurriedly. Another jar said Eyes in the same scrawl, and a tube stated For Decay. "Seems to work too," Sophie murmured, looking into the waste basin with a shiver. Water ran into the basin when she turned a blue-green knob that might have been brass, and washed some of the decay away. Sophie rinsed her hands and face in the water without touching the basin, but she didn't have the courage to use drying power. She dried the water with her skirt and then set off to the next black door. That one opened onto a flight of rickety wooden stairs. Sophie heard someone move there and shut the door hurriedly. It seemed only to lead to a sort of loft anyway. She hobbled to the next door. By now she was moving quite easily. She was a hale old woman, she discovered yesterday. The third door opened onto a poky backyard with high brick walls. It contained a big stack of logs and higgledy-piggledy heaps of what seemed to be scrap iron, wheels, buckets, metal sheeting, wire mounted almost to the tops of the walls. Sophie shut that door too, rather puzzled, because it didn't seem to match the castle at all. There was no castle to be seen above the brick walls. They ended at the sky. Sophie could only think this part was the round side where the invisible wall had stopped her the night before. She opened the fourth door, and it was just a broom cupboard, with 2 fine but dusty velvet cloaks hanging on the brooms. Sophie shut it again slowly. The only other door was in the wall with the window, and that was the door she'd come in by last night. She hobbled over and cautiously opened that. She stood for a moment, looking out at a slowly moving view of the hills, watching heather slide past underneath the door, feeling the wind blow her wispy hair, and listening to the rumble and grind of the big black stones as the castle moved. Then she shut the door and went to the window, and there was the seaport town again. It was no picture. A woman had opened a door opposite and was sweeping dust into the street. Behind that, a greyish canvas sail was going up a mast in brisk jerks, disturbing a flock of seagulls into flying round against the glimmering sea. "I don't understand," Sophie told the human skull. Then, because the fire almost looked out, she went and put a couple of logs away and raked away some of the ash. Green flames climbed between the logs, small and curly, and shot up into a long blue face with flaming green hair. "Good morning," said the fire demon. "Don't forget, we have a bargain." So none of it was a dream. Sophie was not given much to crying, but she sat in the chair for a while, staring at a blurred and sliding fire demon, and didn't pay much attention to the sound of Michael getting up, until she found him standing beside her, looking embarrassed and a little exasperated. "You're still here," he said. "Is something the matter?" Sophie sniffed. "I'm old," she began. But it was just as the witch had said, and the fire demon had guessed. Michael said cheerfully, "Well, it comes to us all in time. Would you like some breakfast?" Sophie discovered she was a very hale old woman indeed. Hello. Right. After only bread and cheese at lunchtime yesterday, she was ravenous. "Yes," she said, and when Michael went to the closet in the wall, she sprang up and peered over his shoulder to see what there was to eat. "I'm afraid there's only bread and cheese," Michael said rather stiffly. "There's a whole basket of eggs in there," Sophie said, "and isn't that bacon? What about a hot drink as well? Where's your kettle?" "There isn't one," Michael said. "Howl's the only one who can cook." "I can cook," said Sophie. "Unhook that frying pan and I'll show you." "Saga, can you shut the door?" Here she is.
Good morning.
Thank you. She reached for the large black pan hanging on the closet wall in spite of Michael trying to stop her. "You don't understand," Michael said. "It's Calcifer, the fire demon. He won't bend down his head to be cooked on for anyone but Howl." Sophie turned and looked at the fire demon, and he flickered back at her wickedly. "I refuse to be exploited," he said. "You mean," Sophie said to Michael, "you have to do without even a hot drink unless Howl's here?" Michael gave an embarrassed nod. "Then you're the one who's being exploited," said Sophie. "Give that here." She wrenched the pan from Michael's resisting fingers, plonked the bacon into it, popped a handy wooden spoon into the egg basket, and marched with the lot down to the fireplace. "Now, Calcifer," she said, "let's have no more nonsense. Bend down your head." "You can't make me," crackled the fire demon. "Oh, yes, I can," Sophie crackled back, with a ferocity that had often stopped her sisters in mid-fight. "If you don't, I shall pour water on you, or I shall pick up the tongs and take away both your logs," she added, as she got herself creaking on her knees by the hearth. Then she whispered, "Or shall I go back on our bargain and tell Howl about it? I can do that, can't I?" "Oh, curses!" Calcifer spat. "Why did you let her in here, Michael?" And sulkily he bent his blue face forward until all that could be seen of him was a ring of curly green flames dancing on the logs. "Thank you," Sophie said, and slapped the heavy pan onto the green ring, to make sure that Calcifer didn't suddenly rise up again. "Hope your bacon burns," Calcifer said, muffled under the pan. Sophie slapped slices of bacon into the pan. It was good and hot. The bacon sizzled and she had to wrap her skirt around her hand to hold the handle. The door opened, but she didn't notice because of the sizzling. "Don't be silly," she told Calcifer, "and hold still. I want to break the eggs." "Oh, hello, Howl," Michael said helplessly. Sophie turned round at that rather hurriedly. She stared. The tall young fellow in a flamboyant blue and silver suit, who had just come in and stopped in the act of leaning a guitar in the corner. He brushed the fair hair from his rather curious glass green eyes and stared back. His long, angular face was perplexed. "Who are you?" said Howl. "Where have I seen you before?" "I'm a total stranger," Sophie lied firmly. After all, Howl had only met her long enough to call her a mouse before, so it was almost true. She ought to have been thanking her lucky stars for the escape she'd had then, but she supposed, in fact her main thought was, "Good gracious, Wizard Howl is only a child in his 20s for all his wickedness." And she would have rather died than let this overdressed boy know she was the girl he'd pitied on May Day. Hearts and souls did not enter into it. Howl was not going to know. "She says her name's Sophie," Michael said. "She came last night." "How did she make Calcifer bend down?" said Howl. "She bullied me," Calcifer said, in a piteous, muffled voice from under the sizzling pan. "Not many people can do that," Howl said thoughtfully. He popped his guitar in the corner and came over to the hearth. The smell of hyacinths mixed with the smell of bacon as he shoved Sophie firmly aside. "Calcifer doesn't like anyone but me to cook on him," she said, wrapping one trailing sleeve around his hand to hold the pan. "Pass me 2 more slices of bacon and 6 eggs, please, and tell me why you've come here." Sophie stared at the blue jewel hanging from Howl's ear and passed him egg after egg. "Why I came, young man?" she said. It was obvious after what she'd seen of the castle. "I came because I'm your new cleaning lady, of course." "Are you indeed?" Howl said, cracking the eggs one-handed and tossing the shells among the logs, where Calcifer seemed to be eating them with a lot of snarling and gobbling. "Who says you are?" "I do," said Sophie, and she added piously, "I can clean the dirt from this place, even if I can't clean you from your wickedness, young man." "Howl's not wicked," Michael said. "Yes, I am," Howl contradicted him. "You forget just how wicked I'm being at the moment, Michael." He jerked his chin at Sophie. "If you're so anxious to be of use, my good woman, find some knives and forks and clear the bench." There were tall stools under the workbench. Michael was pulling them out to sit on and pushing aside all the things on top of it, to make room for some knives and forks he'd taken from the drawer in the side of it. Sophie went to help him. She'd not expected Howl to welcome her, of course, but he had not even so far agreed to let her stay beyond breakfast. Since Michael did not seem to need help, Sophie shuffled over to her stick and put it slowly and showily in the broom cupboard. When that did not seem to attract Howl's attention, she said, "You can take me on for a month's trial, if you like." Wizard Howl said nothing but, "Plates, please, Michael," and stood up, holding the smoking pan. Calcifer sprang up with a roar of release and blazed high in the chimney. Sophie made another attempt to pin the wizard down. "If I'm going to be cleaning here for the next month," she said, "I'd like to know where the rest of the castle is. I can only find this one room and the bathroom." To her surprise, both Michael and the wizard roared with laughter. It wasn't until they'd almost finished breakfast Sophie discovered what made them laugh. Howl was not only hard to pin down, he seemed to dislike answering any questions at all. Sophie gave up asking him and asked Michael instead. "Tell her," said Howl, "it'll stop her pestering." "There isn't any more of the castle," Michael said, "except what you've seen and 2 bedrooms upstairs." "What?" Sophie exclaimed. Howl and Michael laughed again. "Howl and Calcifer invented the castle," Michael explained, "and Calcifer keeps it going. The inside of it is really just Howl's old house in Porthaven, which is the only real part." Porthaven's miles down near the sea, Sophie said. I call that too bad. What do you mean by having this great ugly castle rushing around the hills and frightening everyone in Market Chipping to death? Howl shrugged. What an outspoken old woman you are. I've reached that stage in my career when I need to impress everyone with my power and wickedness. I can't have the king thinking well of me. And last year I offended someone very powerful, and I need to keep out of their way. It seemed a funny way to avoid people, but Sophie supposed wizards had different standards from ordinary people. And she shortly discovered the castle had other peculiarities. They'd finished eating, and Michael was piling the plates on the slimy sink beside the bench, when there came a loud, hollow knocking at the door. Calcifer blazed up. Kingsbury door! Howl, who was on his way to the bathroom, went to the door instead. There was a square wooden knob above the door set into the lintel, with a dab of paint on each of its four sides. At the moment there was a green blob on the side that was the bottom, but Howl turned the knob around so it had a red blob out downward before he opened the door. Outside stood a personage wearing a stiff white wig and a wide hat on top of that. He was clothed in scarlet and purple and gold, and he held up a little staff decorated with ribbons like an infant maypole. He bowed, and the scents of cloves and orange blossom blew into the room. His Majesty presents his compliments and sends payments for 2,000 pairs of 7-league boots, this person said. Behind him Sophie had glimpses of a coach waiting in a street full of sumptuous houses covered with painting carvings, and towers and spires and domes beyond that of a splendour she'd barely imagined before. She was sorry it took so little time for the person at the door to hand over a long, silken, chinking purse, and for Howl to take the purse, bow back and shut the door. Howl turned the square knob back so the green blob was downward again, and stowed the long purse in his pocket. Sophie saw Michael's eyes follow the purse in an urgent, worried way. Howl went straight to the bathroom, then calling out, I need hot water in here, Calcifer, and was gone for a long time. Sophie could not restrain her curiosity. Whoever was at that door, she asked Michael, or do I mean wherever? That door gives on Kingsbury, Michael said, where the king lives. I think that man was the Chancellor's clerk. And, he added worried to Calcifer, I do wish he hadn't given Howl all that money. Is Howl going to let me stay here? Sophie asked. If he is, you'll never pin him down, Michael answered. He hates being pinned down to anything. Interesting. Okay, have a look at the Seesaw account and we'll read some more tomorrow. Bye now.